Have you ever imagined waking up in a country where U.S. Marines, armed in uniform, trained for warfare, aren't deployed to distant war zones, but to the very streets of your hometown? Not to defend against a foreign invasion, not to respond to a catastrophic natural disaster, not to maintain order after an act of terrorism, but to enforce domestic policy. Imagine stepping out of your door in Los Angeles, only to be met by the steely gaze of combat soldiers, their rifles raised not toward enemies abroad, but at fellow citizens. Not a nightmare, not science fiction, not a political thriller. It happened. And it happened on our watch. On the morning of June 12, 2025, a city awoke not to birdsong or traffic, but to helicopters chopping the sky, spotlights dancing through the early fog, the crackle of military radios and boots hammering pavement. A federal task force composed of immigration and customs enforcement agents, National Guard units, and most shockingly, active-duty U.S. Marines swept through Los Angeles in a series of coordinated pre-dawn raids that targeted several predominantly Latino neighborhoods. It was officially labeled a high-priority immigration enforcement operation. But what unfolded on that day, and what continues to unravel in the days since, was something far more troubling. This wasn't just ICE agents knocking politely at doors with clipboards. This was full-body armor, tactical vests, precision entry teams, armored transport vehicles rolling through residential streets like tanks through occupied territory, combat formations outside bungalows, civilians, some of them barely awake, pulled from their homes at gunpoint. Let that image settle in your mind. Let it burn itself into your memory. Because what you're witnessing is not enforcement. It's escalation, it's militarization, it's occupation, and it represents a dangerous turning point. This isn't about immigration anymore. Let's dispense with illusions. This isn't about visa overstays or border violations. This is about power and how far a government is willing to go to keep it. The deployment of the U.S. military, not in support but in execution, of civilian law enforcement, is a fundamental betrayal of American democratic principles. It violates the sacred line that separates military authority from civilian life. And that line wasn't drawn by chance. It was etched into our Constitution, carved out of the painful lessons of history, and protected by laws like the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, a law that explicitly prohibits the use of the U.S. military in civilian policing. When that line is crossed, the results are never benign. The raid, what happened that morning? In the span of 3 hours, more than 120 homes were breached, dozens of families disrupted, hundreds detained, many without warrants presented, many without explanations. Footage and eyewitness testimony reveal scenes that defy belief. Children crying as Marines stand guard outside their bedrooms, drones hovering silently over rooftops, a woman, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, screaming for her husband as he's dragged into a vehicle. A teenage boy thrown face first into a fence, bleeding from the nose, his crime unknown. And when the press finally arrived, they were herded into designated observation zones, far from the heart of the operation, far from the stories that needed telling. The government's justification and the people's rage in the hours that followed, White House spokespeople scrambled to reframe the operation. The Marines, they claimed, were merely there in a support role, providing logistical aid. But the videos tell a different story. The sounds, the sights, the trauma, none of it says support. It says control. It says intimidation. It says force. Civil rights organizations immediately cried foul. Legal scholars warned of constitutional catastrophe. Protesters flooded the streets within hours, marching not just for immigrants but for democracy itself. Because something deeper is unraveling. This isn't just a violation of law, it's a preview of something darker. The symbolism behind the date. This wasn't just any day. June 12th was just 2 days before Donald Trump's birthday. A date that, this year, was set to coincide with the massive No Kings protests, an annual grassroots mobilization against authoritarianism, executive overreach, and the erosion of civil liberties. Millions were preparing to gather in cities across the country to remind leaders that America has no kings, only servants of the Constitution. And suddenly, 2 days before those protests, an unprecedented military action unfolds on domestic soil. Coincidence? Or was it a message? A display of state muscle? A warning shot to dissenters? An experiment in conditioning a population to military rule under the guise of law? We've seen this strategy before. Not in America, but in places we once pointed to with alarm. Regimes that tested boundaries under the veil of national security. That turned police into soldiers. That replaced dialogue with domination. If they can do it there, they can do it anywhere. Los Angeles wasn't chosen by accident. It's a city known for its activism, its diversity, its powerful media presence. If it can happen in LA, it can happen anywhere. In Houston, where climate activists stage sit-ins. In Chicago, where journalists investigate corruption. In Atlanta, where unions fight for worker rights. In your neighborhood, where a protest sign might one day be seen as a threat. History is watching democracies don't crumble in a single day. They wither inch by inch as people make excuses. As citizens tell themselves, this is just temporary. As lawmakers refuse to act, fearing backlash. As media outlets soften the truth in the name of balance. This is how liberty dies. Not with a scream, but with a shrug. The lesson from history is chilling. Once the military is normalized in civilian life, it becomes nearly impossible to remove it. It becomes a new status quo, a new expectation, a new America, one where rights are secondary to order, where fear replaces freedom, where criticism becomes treason. This is the moment that matters. Right now, Americans are flooding the streets, not just in LA, but in every major city. They carry signs with quotes from Thomas Paine, Angela Davis, and Frederick Douglass. They chant not just for immigration reform, but for the survival of a democratic society. They march for the Constitution, for the rule of law, for the idea that no one, not even a government backed by tanks, is above accountability, and the world is watching. Other nations are already issuing statements of concern. Human rights watchdogs are launching investigations. And still, the administration doubles down, refusing to promise it won't happen again. So ask yourself, how far are we willing to let this go? Because this isn't a Democrat issue. This isn't a Republican issue. This is an American issue, a human issue, a future-defining issue. Do we want a country governed by laws and led by principles, or one enforced by boots, guns, and silence? You don't need to agree with the immigration protesters. You don't even need to agree on policy. But you do need to decide this. Should the U.S. military have the authority to detain civilians on American streets? Because if the answer is no, then silence is not an option. And if we do not speak loudly, clearly, and immediately, we may soon lose the ability to speak at all.